I want to welcome everyone to our Learning to Learn seminar series, where we talk about how to study, how to learn more effectively, how to manage our time and our exam preparations to make sure that we're getting the most out of our time at SAIT. A big part of my job as a learning strategist is meeting with students who struggle to learn or are not getting the grades that they want, and they need help troubleshooting and figuring out how to come up with a good system for studying their particular program. And so this seminar series is my attempt to help every student learn quicker, easier, better, and get access to all the same information, even if you can't come in for a one-on-one appointment. So I'm just going to share my screen here and we will get started. Okay, so our first topic that we're going to be tackling is sort of a general study skills um, system. So we're going to learn how to either improve our studying with a few little tips and tricks, or if you are coming in it fresh and you want a system for doing your best, we can help you with that as well. So let's get started and we will start getting to it. So the way I've broken this down is into a few questions that will help guide our discussions. So these questions come from talking to hundreds of students and listening to their specific problems. Over time, I've noticed that a lot of the same problems come up again and again, and they kind of boil down to some of these questions, at least when it comes to study skills. When we approach some of the other topics, there'll be other questions that we'll try to answer. But if you can answer these questions, you're well on your way to just absolutely crushing your courses. So we're going to start with learning a little bit about how humans learn stuff. So we're going to answer the question how we actually learn new information. We're going to also learn how to make our learning active and why we would do that. We're going to learn how to make learning stick. So you don't have to keep reteaching yourself the same concepts over and over again. We'd like to learn how to make it stick the first time. We're going to talk about creating a good learning environment. Environment matters when it comes to learning, and we're going to look at how we can make our environment work for us and not against us. And we're going to lastly talk about how to solve some common learning problems or pitfalls and some things to look out for. So, but first, I'd like you all to close your eyes for a moment and picture a pristine, empty meadow. Just grass, wildflowers, maybe a few trees, but you're imagining yourself walking through this meadow. Imagine yourself taking footsteps through the grass and seeing your footsteps linger. Uh, each time you're walking through, you're leaving a faint trace of your route in the grass. And so if you go back to the start, you can follow your original path and without having to sort of blaze a new trail. And if you keep doing this, each time you walk the same path, you'll wear your footprints a little bit further and further into the field to the point where you've worn a path that's so obvious that you could come back a year later and still retrace your steps with no effort. Creating memories that you can easily recall later is like wearing a path in a field. The more often you travel it, the more you walk the same path, the more you deal with challenges that come up, the easier it becomes to follow, and you get to the point where you can do it with your eyes closed, basically. Now open your eyes, um, and we're going to use this metaphor of wearing a path in a field throughout the rest of the presentation. So, of course, your brain is not a meadow. It's a 3 pound lump of fat, protein, water, and salts. That's about the size of a small cantaloupe. And it's also the most complex thing we know of in the entire universe. Fortunately, uh, making our brains learn stuff is simpler than understanding how it learns stuff. but we're going to look at sort of a simple model for how this works that'll help us understand what we're trying to do when we're studying. So, how do humans learn stuff? At its most basic, uh, learning is neurons and synapses uh, coming together into networks. So, what does that mean? Neurons are almost like wires in our brain that transmit electrical and chemical signals to other neurons and other cells that make our body do what we need our body to do to stay alive. Synapses are where all the neurons connect together and to other cells. And so neural networks are the two mixed together. It's a bunch of neurons that are all interconnected and at synapses that are lighting up in different patterns. It's following these patterns to process the information by signaling each other. And so learning is actually activating new patterns in your brain. We all have lots of neural networks already set up. There's some that we're just born with, there's some that we've created in our early life, in our later lives. But learning is making new patterns in our brain and then having those patterns repeat. These new patterns are sometimes created by creating new connections, but usually they're by making the connections you already have weaker or stronger in a certain pattern. And so this theme uh, of making connections stronger is really what we're getting at when it comes to learning. So learning is activating new patterns in your brain, and our goal is to be able to use these patterns whenever we want. So where do these patterns come from? New patterns come from experiences and repetition. Um, New experiences cause new patterns or change old ones. And so these experiences are things like seeing and hearing something for the first time. Um, when we do hear it for the first time or we see something new, um, our brain creates these patterns. And then every time we see it again, the pattern repeats and gets stronger. The things that we don't see again, patterns that don't repeat, get weaker. Um, and so the name of the game when it comes to studying is repeating that experience to make the pattern repeat until the pattern becomes so strong that we can use it whenever we want. You want to be able to generate the pattern without needing the experience. We will talk about that more. This spinning image on the right, this is an image that scientists at Google produced of just one tiny part of the web of connections of neurons and synapses. These like long kind of tentacle kind of things, these thin wires are the neurons, and where they kind of clump together in the middle, those are the synapses. It's like a junction where signals can go into different patterns and things like that. So let's look at how we can actually apply this kind of more theoretical information in a practical way to help us with our courses. Uh, so if learning is activating new patterns in your brain, then that means learning's an activity. So it needs to be active. Activity is really, really key here. Um, Learning is not something that just happens. It's not an object. It's an activity. It's a process. It's something that unfolds. It's not something that's static and just is what it is. So it needs to be active. If you try to learn passively, you'll get little bits and pieces, but you're not going to get the full picture. All types of learning require mental action on your part. So things like connecting ideas, remembering, explaining, questioning, all of these kinds of things. Um, Brain activity requires engagement. You need to engage with information or experiences to get those patterns to form and to persist. Passive exposure just doesn't engage our brains that much. And so going to class is really important, but passively just sitting in class, uh, vaguely listening to what's going on won't get you, you know, an easy time when it comes to exams. Um, you need a little bit more than that. Learning something that the brain uh, does. It's not something that um, a brain has. So, as an example, has anyone heard of these subliminal message tapes that they used to sell in the 80s? They were tapes or CDs that were marketed to people who wanted to do things like quit smoking or lose weight or make their memories better, these kinds of things. They were typically like spoken sayings, hidden so you couldn't actually consciously hear them. To be hidden in music or at a low volume, and you would, put them on before you went to bed, or you would listen to them, on your commute to work or whatever. And the idea was your subconscious would absorb the message and change your behavior because of it. Um, we process things in an unconscious way all the time, so the idea is you could tap into this and make learning easier. But what people found was that complex learning and this kind of behavior change kind of stuff needed more. If you could learn this kind of information in a passive way, subliminal tapes would have worked, and we would all be learning with these tapes now instead of going to class. So again, learning must cause the brain to do something. It's an activity. Okay, so what should I actually be doing when I study? We're going to look at a model that kind of breaks down your activities into four areas. And the goal is to make your learning active, but mainly to create a study routine that you can do every day for the length of your program. You can come up with the best study routine in the world, but if you can only last doing it for a week, it's not going to help you. You need something sustainable. So we're going to look at um, four areas to consider, ways to use active techniques in each of these areas to get the most out of studying and to save ourselves time and effort and energy, and how we can do this from the very start of term and build those good habits. If you don't build the habits right from the start of term, it gets a little bit more challenging. If we're halfway through the term and you're just coming across this, yes, 100%, you can incorporate a bunch of these things. But the best thing to do is try to get into good habits right from the start. So don't be discouraged if you're already halfway through. There's lots of stuff in here that'll help you. So we looked a little bit at how human beings learn things. We discovered that learning is brain activity and learning needs to be active, that it's these patterns that we're trying to create. So, how do we make learning active? How do we make our brains light up in these new patterns? And then, how do we make these patterns repeat whenever we want? Like, for example, when we're writing an exam or when we're on the job later and we need to access the information. So, yeah, let's look at these four areas, what we're doing before class, what we're doing in class, what we're doing after class, and what we're doing to get ready for exams. So the goal here is to look at each of these and plan. You're going to want to plan your active learning activities for each one in a way that you can repeat over and over and over again. There's tons of different tools and techniques. We'll talk about these. So you want these to work for you, and you want them to be something you can do every day, as I mentioned. Post-secondary is a marathon, not a sprint. You don't want to run out of steam mid-race. You don't want to burn yourself out early on. And so you're going to have to avoid big, heroic, but short-lived study strategies. So, okay, how can we build a system that we can actually live with every day? So, first off, what are we doing before class to get ready? And the goal is to prepare your brain so that learning in class is easier. Some of this is things like get a good sleep and eat food and drink water, but we want to get a little bit more specific than that. So the main purpose of your before class activities is not mastering the information or even really learning it. The main purpose is to get ready so that you can get the most out of your class and save yourself time later. So the way that this works is by activating relevant neural networks. You know, lighting these patterns up in our brains early so that we can lay a foundation for those patterns when we get them in class. You're trying to create sort of mental hooks or sites around which the new information can kind of stick and cluster. Places that you can plug in new information so that it lasts. This lowers the effort needed to form the new connections when you're in class, and it can reduce overloading your brain so your brain doesn't work as well in class, especially later on into the semester. So, what does this look like? You want activities that are short, 5 to 15 minutes, that are repeatable and are low resistance, that are not huge efforts. Because this is something you want to be able to do quickly in the morning or the night before without spending hours and hours doing it. So good candidates are skimming lecture slides, readings, other course materials. If you haven't looked at your course outlines, every course at SAIT has a course outline, and at the end of the course outline are learning objectives. That is sort of like a checklist of the most important things you need to know in class. They're framed in a way that you can easily turn them into sort of study questions and practice tests, and you want to use these to your advantage. We'll go more into this as we progress. And so you can look at the learning objectives in the course outline and match them up with what you're going to be learning that day and see what your instructor is really trying to get across to you. This helps you ignore the details and focus on the main themes, which we'll talk about as well. You try writing down a couple questions, 2 or 3 questions about the new materials that you'd want to answer. You can review key terms from last class. You can make a super rough concept map. I'm not saying you have to do all of these activities. I'm saying these are some good candidates to choose from. But learning is really a personal experience, and you know how you learn best. And so that's the best route to kind of coming up with a system that's going to work for you. If it takes you more than 15 minutes to do your before class activities for a particular class, then it's probably too much. So avoid reading too much in detail, memorizing, a lot of information, trying to get perfectly ahead and stay perfectly ahead. This is a fool's errand. It's very difficult and it is very discouraging when we can't do it. If you do too much, then you burn too much energy too early and you end up abandoning the habit entirely. So active learning during class is easier and works better when your brain's warmed up a bit. Like you're priming your brain for action, or you're warming up like an athlete or a musician would warm up before a performance. It's like thinking ahead of time what your path through the field's going to be before you even get there. Which things might come up, which things you might want to find or do. It'll just make the journey a little bit easier and quicker. So you've primed yourself for class. You've created a situation where you're going to more easily be able to remember the ideas that you're presented with in class. What's next? Obviously, go to class. There are tons of advantages to being in class. Um, And the goal with being in class is not to, memorize every little bit of information or write down every word the instructor's saying. The goal is to spend time thinking about the ideas being presented and processing them. And so you do this by trying to connect the new information with information you already know. You do it by asking questions, and you do it by testing your understanding against what your instructor is saying. So in classes where the brain patterns really start to take shape, you're reinforcing the neural networks that you activated before class, and you're expanding them, and you're testing them against what your instructor's saying. You're basically walking the path in the meadow and deciding what parts you want to widen, what parts you want to adjust slightly, speed up for, slow down for, basically like fine tune what your path is. So what are some activities you can use to do this? So asking questions is a big one. It can be out loud to the instructor or just inside your head. But either way, you want to question what you were being told. Like think critically. Ask yourself why your instructor is teaching you this. Taking notes is a huge one. There's tons of evidence and research that show that taking notes in class improves your grades a lot. Um, it could be taking full notes or even just following along on PowerPoint slides or modules or readings and underlining key things, making little diagrams or concept maps. If you're someone who finds you can't follow what's going on and take notes at the same time, something like that can be a helpful way to kind of do it, or even just write down a few keywords or things that your instructor talks about for a long time or emphasizes or says is going to be on the exam. Try summarizing what's being talked about in a sentence or two rather than trying to write down word for word what the instructor's saying. You can summarize it in your head or in your notes, but just try to think about what the bottom line is, like what the average is of all the ideas that you're discussing. Try to predict what comes next, or come up with examples from your personal experience, or apply concepts to examples from class, like some way to engage with the information. And participate actively. Like if you want to actively learn, then respond in discussion, solve problems, answer prompts. Again, either out loud or in your head. It doesn't need to be out loud if you're, shy or introverted or you just don't process information that way. That's fine, but try to do it inside of your head. Even small actions like just jotting down a question or summarizing a point really strengthens the patterns more than just passive listening. Okay, so you've primed your brain for class, you've engaged in the class, you've taken a bunch of notes, whatever it might be. What do we do to make sure we don't lose those new patterns that we just spent all this time and effort creating? One of the most wasteful things you can do is let the new patterns that you've created, the new information that you've received, just sit and do nothing until exam time. That's a really good way to make yourself learn all that information over again and waste all that time. So, one of the most important tools for this is revision, reviewing the information, looking at the information we learned in class again to keep us from forgetting. So remember, forgetting is basically when the new brain pattern isn't repeated, so it weakens. The ones that we remember are the ones we've repeated, so they strengthen. So think of the meadow again. Forgetting is basically like we waited too long and now we can't see our path in the grass anymore. We can't see our footprints. So let's pause for a minute and just talk a little bit about how we forget and why. We've talked a lot about learning and remembering, but not about forgetting. One of the things that people don't realize is that forgetting is normal, it's expected. It's just an outcome of how our brains work every single day. Our brains are constantly taking in huge sums of information all day, every day that we're awake. And it tries to throw out things when it can. So like even now, I'm hearing, people in the background talking, I'm seeing things around my office, and my brain is taking all that information in and trying to decide, am I going to need this later? Um, its default mode is to throw stuff out because it just gets so much every day. And it happens super fast. So let's visualize the process a little bit. I'm going to put a graph up. Um, On the left side here is how much we remember after we learn a new thing for the first time. So like, um, and then at the bottom is the number of days since we've learned that information. And so if I asked you right after class what you did in class, um, you start out way up here at 100%, maybe 90%. Everyone's a little bit different. But the idea is that uh, time passing weakens our memories. And so we need to do some things to keep them strong so we don't lose them. So if you draw a line representing how much we forget and how fast we forget from this original position, um, which is the first time we've learned something, uh, it drops off really fast by at least 50% in the first day or two. Within 48 hours, you are down to very little. And by the time the exam comes, you remember almost nothing if you've done nothing else. So to remember, we need to signal to our brains about what to keep and what not to keep. And repeating the thought patterns is one of the big ways to do this. And the quickest way to do this is reviewing the information. So remember, patterns that repeat get stronger, and patterns that don't repeat get weaker. So if we hear something new in class and we don't hear it again until a week later, we can't remember it when we did. So how do we review? Each time uh, you learn something new, you want to try to uh, go over it again a couple times over the next few days. Within 24 hours is best for the first time, but the sooner the better. Definitely within the first couple days. So the more times you review the information, the less time you spend. Uh, re- uh, so the more times you review the information, the less time you spend reviewing the information, and so that way you make room for the new things you learned each day. I'll show you this in a second. It's hard to describe in words. But each time you review, reread over your notes, whatever it might be, you strengthen the pattern and alter it to become a little more accurate or a little bit more detailed or something like that. Um, each review brings you back up to that like 100% kind of level. So the first time you review, it brings you back up to 100%, and then it starts falling off again. But it doesn't fall off as quickly, and it never goes down as low as it would have if you hadn't reviewed. And so each time you do the second review, same thing. You forget less quickly. Once you do it a few times, the information is really in your head, and you can kind of spend less time doing it. So maybe this first review, you might spend 10 minutes reviewing the information. The next time you spend maybe 3 minutes. The next time you spend 30 seconds. But by looking at it over and over again, you're keeping those memories strong. And once it's deep enough, once you've worn the path in the meadow, down to the dirt, you can come back years later and still find it. And this is what you're trying to do is wear that pattern in by having it over and over and over again, and by not having the ones that you want to forget. So let's look at some other class tools. Remember, the goal is to strengthen the new patterns so you can access them again later. So, what are some good review activities? There's lots of different things you can choose from. Rereading your notes, drawing concept maps, summarizing, things like that. You want to make them as accurate as you can, and you want to make sure they're as active as possible. You want to focus on important things, and you want to practice remembering. I call this recall practice, or you'll see it as retrieval, things like that. You want to practice remembering as much as possible. So we haven't talked about retrieval in detail yet, but it's one of the number one things students don't do that makes exams really difficult. We'll talk about this a lot more, and we'll especially talk about it in the seminar on memory. So if you're trying to improve your memory, I have lots of ideas for you on how you can kind of do that. If you spend lots of time studying, but then go blank in exams, the first thing I would suggest is try doing more recall practice. Uh, Recall is remembering as much as you can without looking at your notes, and then doing that again and again and again until you don't need to look at your notes anymore. And if we think back to what we've learned about how humans remember things, it's because every time we practice remembering it, that pattern gets a little stronger, we lose it a little less quickly, and we can find it again later really easily. A big part of this too is not memorizing every single little detail, but summarizing, focusing on the main themes or important concepts or actions or whatever it might be. You can do this by looking at the learning objectives, um, paying attention to the things your instructor highlights in class, and paying attention to things like study guides, practice tests, um, things like that. That's how you can kind of pick out some of the main themes rather than just the little details. Um, so in terms of activities, a good sort of starting point for uh, doing this is maybe at the end of each day, recopying your notes and putting them into your own words, or reordering them, summarizing them. This is one really good method. So, kind of what this would look like is before class, you skim through your PowerPoints or your readings really quick, the learning objectives, see what you're going to be learning in class, staying engaged, taking notes, asking questions after class, recopying your notes and putting them into a format that's easy to study, something like that. Other things you could do would be, making flashcards or inputting them into a flashcard kind of program, comparing your notes with the learning objectives and the course outline, drawing concept maps, things like that. And of course, you're going to want to complete the assigned readings, assigned assignments. Sometimes, if you're going to be doing an assignment about a concept that you learned that day, you can skip rereading your notes and just use the assignment for the review that day. So that's a way to kind of save a little bit of time. Don't do the same thing twice when you can kind of do it once and get it all done. And you can make a judgment call about whether about the readings or assignments can stand in for review on occasion. Um, but one piece of advice is don't try to study every single little detail. Um, you have to try to figure out what you need to study and what's important. Um, so ask yourself, what are you studying? A super common error is thinking you need to memorize every single detail. Um, if your goal is to get 100% on every test you ever write, uh, then yeah, you probably would need to memorize every single detail. It's just not practical and it burns you out really fast. And so, what's more important is to try to focus on the most important topics and themes. 80% of the exam are going to be these things, and it's only 20% that are going to be some of these more detailed things. And so, yeah, focus on the main topics and themes. How do you do that? Big one is instructor hints and cues in class, things that they say, oh, this is going to be on the exam, or things that they talk about for a long time, things that they write on the board, study guides, practice tests they post. Really good to pay attention to that. Um, Lots of resources in your Brightspace D2L. The course outline has the learning objectives. We could also just ask the instructor what they think the most important stuff is. Even if they say it's all important, they'll usually help you narrow it down a little bit. Okay. So basically, the idea is to, once you've created a path through the meadow, try to walk the path every day. Don't wait weeks and weeks because then you won't be able to find your footprints. So even if it's just a super quick stroll through the meadow, try to do it. Okay. So before exams, you're going to have to um, reinforce the new information a little more. And you're going to want to try to reinforce it under exam-like conditions. So that means not rereading your notes. That means trying to remember without your notes and just using your notes to check to see if you got the right answer. So yeah, basically we've created good habits already. Let's say we've primed our brains, we've engaged in class, we've reinforced the new patterns through daily review. So we have a really good foundation to prepare for an exam. So those kinds of activities, those are what you're doing all the time. Every day, you're doing each of those things and trying to keep things current. But then when it comes time to get ready for the exam, maybe a week ahead, 2 weeks ahead, depending on what your exams are like. If you have an exam every week, maybe this is what you do Thursday, for example, or something like that. But it's more intense than your normal after class activities. Um, And so we're starting to shift from do I understand this to can I produce this when I need it? We've already rewired our brains to incorporate the new knowledge and skills. Now we just need to be able to produce these patterns when we want to in an exam environment. And so remember, the goal here is not to learn a bunch of new information and cram it all in 2 days before the exam. This is a good way to, at best, get D's and C's. What we're trying to do is reinforce what we already learned and maybe fix a mistake or two or deepen our understanding a bit. That's fine. Um, and we're reinforcing it in the style that we're going to be tested on. So there are three main things to prioritize when getting ready for tests. You want to practice remembering things under exam-like conditions. So this means you don't have the information in front of you. This means that maybe there's some time pressure. Maybe this means trying to do it in a format that's going to look like the exam. Um, we're going to try to identify weak paths. So things that we struggle to remember, we're going to try to identify them so we can focus on them. And then you want repeated spaced passes. So this means you're doing it multiple times, not just once. You're spacing them out, so you're not trying to do this all in one day the day before, and you're trying to repeat it uh, over and over again. So let's look at these steps a little bit more in detail. So as I've mentioned, um, recall practice is really important. The most common complaint I get when I work with students who are struggling is that they spend a lot of time doing the studying, but they go blank in the exam. I hear this probably from three-quarters of the students who come in who are having challenges. One thing it could be is test anxiety. We'll cover that in the exam skills seminar, or you can meet with one of our counselors in the student development and counseling office. They have good strategies for this as well. But I'd say the number one mistake that leads to going blank in exams is not doing recall practice. Uh, just rereading our notes over and over again, um, but not trying to remember it. So recall practice is practicing remembering. This is what lets you produce those new brain patterns at will instead of needing the original experience to do it for you. So if you have your notes in front of you and you reread them, you can produce that brain pattern again. But you're not going to be able to do that on the exam without your notes. So when you're studying, you have to try to do that without your notes before you get into the exam. So you can do this by simply thinking of the information and then checking yourself and then repeating this until you get it right the first time. You can also do this by explaining out loud or in writing, answering practice questions, teaching the concept to a real or even an imaginary person. You can even explain it to like a chatbot like ChatGPT. Anything where you're actively producing the information rather than receiving the information. You're practicing remembering. You're not practicing putting ideas in your head. You're practicing getting them out. Recall practice can feel really hard because you're literally changing your brain structure. It's like feeling sore after a workout. You feel worse in the moment, but better in the long run, and you can do more and more and more. What I mean by under exam like conditions means you're trying to make your practice more like the exam, like an athlete making the practice more like a game, or a musician practicing a piece of music like they're in a recital rather than they're just at home, noodling away. Um, So this means it's a little more work to figure out what the exam is going to look like. So for now, just start by asking your instructor, but we have way more tips in the exam skills seminar. Um, uh, if you've had a few exams in your class already, you kind of have a sense of what they're going to be like. But there's tons of information you can get. Is it multiple choice, short answer, open book? Do you get to bring in, a cheat sheet or your textbook? Is it online or in class? How many questions is it going to be? How many marks is it worth? And then taking that information and working to practice like it's the exam. So imagine you're going to be creating the exam. How would you ask the questions? Pretend you're the instructor. And don't discount using AI for this. If you're careful with your prompting or you have materials you can upload or learning objectives you can upload, you can actually get something that feels quite like the real exam. We'll talk about that more in the AI study skills seminar. Um, and so you can check it out there. So figure out how long you have for each question and uh, try to give yourself that much time or less when you're studying to kind of practice that time pressure. Do practice questions in a busy coffee shop to make it more realistic to what an exam is going to be like. If you're just studying alone in your room, you're not getting used to distractions, which are going to happen during the exam, unless your exam's online in your room, for example. And so, again, identify weak paths. Study sessions should be at least somewhat diagnostic. Like, what do I know well? What do I struggle to remember? Um, and spending more time on the things that we're not good at. Um, I have a friend who's a drummer, and he said to get really good at drumming uh, is spending a lot of time on your weak hand, not your dominant hand, to make sure that it's as good as your dominant hand, or else it'll always kind of lag behind. And remember, forgetting or struggling, it's not a failure, it's information that helps you know how to spend your limited time. So pay attention to that. You can even like rank it from like, you know, out of 5 stars or out of 10 or whatever it might be. Repeated spaced passes. So multiple shorter sessions spread out beat grueling marathons every single time. Consistency beats intensity. You're trying to study a little bit every single day rather than big, long, heroic sessions, the day before the exam. So a simple pattern for this, you could try, 20, 25 minutes of studying, 5 minute break, 20 minutes of studying, 5 minute break, switching up the topics as you go, switching up the course as you go, space it out, move it around. Don't fall too much into a consistent pattern. Um, Try to keep it interesting and keep yourself from zoning out. Also, sleep is when our brains strengthen a lot of these memories. So get as much sleep as you can. Oftentimes, staying up all night the night before an exam studying actually gets you worse grades because you're exhausted. And so you're better off, going to bed a few hours earlier and getting that extra sleep if you need it. The more sleep you get in between study sessions, the more fail-proof your knowledge becomes. So if you forget information, if you forget all the stuff you studied before you get in the exam, try to get more sleep and try to space out your studying more earlier, smaller, shorter sessions. Remember, school's a marathon, not a sprint. You got to manage your energy. And then what to avoid before exams. The big one is just passively rereading your notes or highlighting as the main strategy. That can be a strategy to support, that can be a strategy to review, but you don't want that to be your main strategy. And you want to focus on the things, um, you don't want to focus on the things that you know well already. If you know the answer 100% of the time cold, that's not the thing to spend your most of your time on because you already got that. Don't forget entirely about it. You want to get those easy marks. That's the low hanging fruit, but you want to focus on the things that you don't know quite as well already. Um, Cramming in one long session, one of the worst ways to study. Even if you're able to muddle your way through the exam the next day, you're not going to remember it for the next exam or the next exam or the next course or when you get on the job. So you're really you're creating a whole bunch of work for yourself later, relearning all of these things instead of just doing it right the first time. Um, Another thing to avoid is studying while distracted or exhausted to some extent. Like I said, you want to make sure that it's exam-like conditions. So you want to have exam-like distractions, but not, people talking to you and just, you know, fully distracted. Okay. So one of our questions that I talked about at the start that we are asking ourselves is how to create a good learning environment. This is really important. So how do we create a good learning environment? Um, so say you have good technique, um, you're previewing material, you're being active in class, you're reviewing regularly, you're doing recall practice, you're spacing out your studying, you're doing all these things really well. If you're doing these things, you can study anytime, anywhere, and get really good results. Doesn't matter where you're studying. But the environment that you're studying in does make a difference. So let's look at how we can do that. But don't let not having a perfect environment stop you from studying. You don't need a perfect environment. A good example of this, not that long ago, researchers who used mice would house them in kind of these little basic sterile little cages, because the idea was the results would be better by reducing the number of variables and simplifying things. But about 10 years ago, researchers started to notice that these sterile, kind of boring, unnatural environments were actually stressing the mice out so much that it was changing their biology to the point where it was ruining their studies. So the point of this is uh, environment affects what happens in our bodies, including and maybe especially in our brains. Things like stress, distraction, discomfort, all that changes how well our brains form and retrieve patterns. So think carefully about where you're going to study whenever you can. But remember, the environment does impact things, but effort still matters more. So studying using good technique in a bad environment, you're going to be able to do pretty well. But studying with bad technique in a good environment is you're still going to not get the results that you want. So what does this look like? There's a few things to consider when you're choosing a study space. Don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. There really isn't a perfect study space, just better and worse spaces for you. We're all a little bit different, so you need to make it work for yourself. Some things to think about are noise. You want a place that has minimal distractions, that works for you. Some people need absolute silence. Other people want to have background noise. If you're trying to prepare for an exam, you might want to have exam-like noises there, as I mentioned. So if you need quiet places, think of things like the basement of the library or the study pods in John Ware. These are quiet places. Whereas like the Starbucks in Johnson Cobb or the main floor of Aldred, they're a bit more lively, a bit more background noise, things like that. So you whatever works best for you, try to get into those spaces. And just a note in general, um, breaking some habits and studying in different places can be really helpful as well. So you want to be comfortable, but not too comfortable. If you study in bed, you might have difficulty concentrating, or you might make it hard on yourself to fall asleep when it is bedtime. If your chair hurts your back, it might be hard to focus. So try to make sure you're comfortable without being too comfortable. You want good lighting. Natural light has some benefits, but it's not necessary, but it can be nice. But basically, you want to find a place with enough light that you don't strain your eyes and that it's not distracting. You want to make sure that all the materials you need are available. Um, Having a separate space is really good because it helps minimize distractions and it helps train your brain to focus when it is in that space. But it's not always possible. We don't always have uh, choice of spaces. We might have limited space options. So just whatever space you're using, make it as good for studying as you can. So even if it's a space that you use for other things, put distractions away before you start. Let people around you know that you're studying and so forth and these kinds of things. Try to make it a good spot. Adjust the lighting, things like that. If you don't have a choice of spaces, then there's different tools you can use to help make it best for you. You can use earplugs or noise canceling headphones. You can eliminate the distractions that you have control over. Um, One thing that helps a lot of students is a repeated setup ritual. I've had students who have like little knickknacks and things like that that they'll put on their desk when it's study time. They'll put it away when it's not study time, things like that. A lot of this comes down to your personal preference. So experiment and figure out what works best for you, but try to do it early in the term so you can get into good habits. There's lots of good spots on campus. There's places with private desks. group study areas if you like to study with other people. Um, if you are looking for a quieter spot, a good rule of thumb is the basement or upper floors usually are better than the main floors. Towards the outside of the building tend to be better than the middle of the building, as a general kind of rule. In the library, the main floor is for group studying. The basement's a quiet area. They also have study rooms that you can book. I mentioned the spaces in John Ware too. There's these little pods that you can book. They're like phone booths, if anyone remembers what phone booths are, but for studying. If you want a list, you can just Google SAIT study spaces, and there's a good list that comes up. Another important thing is to use the time of day to your advantage. So, are you a night owl or an early bird? Are you an early riser, or do you stay up late at night, or somewhere in the middle, for example? Um, there's been a big surge in research into the effect that this has on our bodies and our minds. Um, uh, Oftentimes, it's talked about as chronotype, so whether we're an early bird or a night owl. Um, but the increase in the number of people who are wearing Apple Watches and Fitbits and things like that has given a lot of data for researchers to study. And there's a few things that they've been able to kind of pull out of this data that applies to what we're trying to do here. Um, so yeah, are you a night owl or an early bird? What's your chronotype? One thing to note is uh, the effect is small. So if you are a morning person, but you're busy in the morning, you can't study, uh, don't worry. You'll be able to do a good job at any time of day. But just like the environment, even though you can do a great job with less than ideal kind of situations, if you really want to like maximize it and get the most you can out of it, and you have some control, you can start thinking of these kinds of things. So part of the research is that it does seem to appear that we have a preference. Each person has a preference for a certain time of the day that's biological, not just lifestyle choices or culture. Um, and this makes sense evolutionarily in that when you think of like groups of hunter-gatherers living in a forest or a plain or somewhere like that, um, to have some members of the group alert early and others late is a really good benefit for watching out for dangers while still getting enough rest. But again, these are not huge effects though. Learning might feel easier at your peak times, but you can study anytime. So don't use your chronotype as an excuse. Um, Also, it appears that our chronotype is it changes over our lives. It's not fixed. So you might be an early bird, at one point in your life and become more of a night owl later on, depending on what's going on. But when you study seems to matter because our brain's energy, attention, and tolerance for challenges and efforts changes across the day. So start trying to notice when you focus the best, when you have the most mental stamina, when you have the most tolerance for frustration and challenges, and try to study at those times if you can. Um, you can experiment early in the term to figure out what your best times are, rather than waiting until 2 days before the exam. This would be a helpful thing to do. Um, and another really interesting aspect of the research that's been coming out is that a lot of students who say that they're night owls are actually just chronically sleep deprived. So when researchers control for sleep, the night owl early bird effects kind of shrink, but they don't go entirely away. So getting enough sleep is important, and it's actually more important to learning than when you're studying. So this is why I say, even if you're an early bird, you can study at night. If you're a night owl, you can study in the morning. You just might be a little bit more effort. Um, Simply put, a well-rested night owl beats a sleepy early bird, and vice versa, regardless of what time it is on the clock. So what does this mean for us? How do we maximize our learning? My advice would be to tailor your activities to the time of day if possible. So study when you can, and if you have a choice, pick a time when you seem to study better. Um, Notice when you have high energy, uh, this is when those times are when you want to learn new or difficult things, do lots of recall practice, do a lot of problem solving. When you're feeling more low energy, that's when it's better to do some light review, maybe organizing your stuff, creating some flashcards to use later, things like that. But don't let the time of day keep you from studying. A lot of people will ask, like, how long should I study for? Um, and you'll hear a lot of formulas for this. But despite what people tell you, there's no single formula. You might hear things like, oh, you need to do 3 hours per course per week, or 2 hours outside of class for every hour in class, something like that. These kind of like general formulas are usually meant to get us to study more because a lot of students underestimate how long you need to spend studying to be able to actually do well in exams and things like that. Um, but your biology, your personality, all the methods that you're using, your routines and habits all affect how long you need to spend studying. So there's no real formula for that fits everybody. So let's look at a few things to consider. How long it takes to learn something depends on a bunch of different things. Depends on the type of test that you're doing. Is it pure memorization, or do you need to do some analysis? Do you need to think critically about it? You need to talk about the pros and cons. All of these things make a difference. Um, Things like how much you know about it ahead of time, the exact methods that you're using. If you're doing almost no recall practice, it takes longer. If you do lots of recall practice, it takes shorter. Um, how distracted you are, how fatigued you are. Two students can spend the exact same time studying and get really different results depending on how they use those hours. The general rule, though, is quality tends to beat quantity. Um, you don't want to skimp, but you want quality studying. Brains learn best in relatively short, focused bursts. Um, we really all can only focus for like 15, 30 minutes at a time, somewhere in that range. After that, attention and remembering tends to drop, and we tend to get bored or start zoning out, and we get a lot of diminishing returns the longer and longer we go. So it might feel productive to study for 5 hours straight, but you really do get worse results after about 20 to 30 minutes. So you end up spending longer studying than you have to because the quality isn't there. So breaks are not laziness or luxury. They're a really important, necessary, critical part of learning. A good analogy for this is imagine an Olympic weightlifter. They don't just lift weights for 12 hours the day before the competition. Uh, they lift weights a little bit for a long time before they ever get to the competition. And they rest when they're tired. Learning's the same way. You want to tire out your brain and then let it rest, and then tire it out and let it rest. You don't want to just burn it to the ground. Breaks are what lets us recover our attention and memory, reduces boredom and fatigue, and it makes studying sustainable for the whole semester instead of burning out after the first month. Some signs you might need a break are you're rereading the same sentence over and over again, making more errors, feeling frustrated. Um, a little note on this, everybody's a bit different. If you have ADHD, for example, or super high anxiety, you might want to start with even shorter blocks and work your way up. Um, if you have a real appetite for the subject or you're really interested, you can start out at the higher end, 30 minutes or something like that. So I said that there's no formulas for learning, but if you do want a starting point to help you get going, aim for sort of 30 to 90 minutes per course per day. depending on how hard the courses are, how close your exams are, things like that. But start out there, see if that works for you. If it's not enough, add a little more time. Um, if you're running out of time, shorten it a little bit and just play around with it a little bit, especially in your first semester, and try to figure out what works best for you. And break down your study time that you do have. Say you're going to study for 90 minutes, you know, you have three classes, 30 minutes each, you have 90 minutes of studying. Um, Break that down into 20 or 30-minute blocks with 5-minute breaks in between. Just remember a focused 20 minutes of recall is better than an hour of just passive rereading. Okay, so almost finished. How do you solve common learning problems? Is our next question. So I'm going to talk about four sort of pitfalls that students fall into a lot. Perfectionism, multitasking, unrealistic ideas about how much you can accomplish, and skipping recall practice. If you look at any of the other seminars, you will hear me talk about recall practice a lot. So um, uh, you can tell that it's something that is very important. So perfectionism is uh, when you want to be perfect in everything. And it's very exhausting and it's pretty futile. Um, you're learning so much information and there's so many different things you need to manage that it takes a lot of effort to get A's on absolutely everything. And A's are not necessary for most of what you want to accomplish in life. If it's just a personal challenge for you and you like getting A's, cool, but don't let it hurt you mentally if you're not getting 100% on everything. You want to treat learning as growth, not as a flawless performance that you're trying to do all the time. Nobody puts their grades in their first semester classes on their resume, and if they do, it doesn't really help you get a job. Errors are what reveal what to improve. Think of it like information, not a crushing defeat. So if you do bad on an exam, figure out what you did wrong, and so you can correct the next time. You want to set realistic goals. So don't assume that you're going to get 100% on everything, but it's good to have goals, even high goals that you might not accomplish. So if you usually get, 75% in a course, maybe shoot for 80, something like that. Um, don't spend lots of time on things that aren't being graded. This is a huge waste of time that I used to do a lot when I was in school. So things like style choices, which font you're going to use, cover pages if the cover pages aren't being graded, things like that. And try to use the 80-20 rule. Focus, usually uh, 20% of our efforts get us 80% of our results. And the other 80% of our efforts get us 20%. So you want to focus on that 20% that's going to get us the best results. Focus on your effort where it matters most. Multitasking is another one. And multitasking is something that you should try just not to do. Multitasking, if you don't know, is trying to do more than one activity at the same time. Um, and it feels like this is more efficient. Even if I do it, feels like I'm being more efficient by multitasking. But our brains, there's so much research now that's shown this not to be true. Our brains are not wired to focus on more than one thing at a time. So multitasking is not being efficient. Multitasking, when you hook people up to brain scanners and things like that, finds that it's just us switching back and forth um, between subjects quickly. Uh, so this is something you want to try to avoid. What happens when you multitask is you have a reduced ability to focus. You disrupt all the natural processes that actually lead you to forming long-term memories, to have these patterns be reproducible, and you really reduce your efficiency. So you might do two things simultaneously for half an hour when you could have done each one individually in 10 minutes. So 20 minutes instead of half an hour, something like that. Being unrealistic is a really common thing. Um, be realistic about how much you can do in a day, a week, a month. Don't assume you can do way more this time than you did the last time or way quicker than the last time. The name of the game is incremental improvements. Try to get a little bit better each day than getting perfect the first day. Anyone who's really good at something, take for example, I don't know, um, say like an Olympic swimmer. Like Michael Phelps didn't just like jump into the pool the day before the competition and knocked it out of the park. He probably started out as a slow or average swimmer, but got a little bit quicker each day. And that those small improvements add up to big improvements in the long run. The things we do every day tend to have a bigger impact than the big things we do just one time. And so be honest with yourself about how much you can accomplish. And skipping recall practice. Like I said, this is kind of my hobby horse. Um, if you study by rereading your notes over and over and over again, you are wasting just a ton of time and not fully getting what you could out of the information. Once you understand a concept, reading it over and over again doesn't actually make you understand it or remember it any better. Uh, if you don't understand something, that's when you're rereading until you understand it, or you're asking someone else for help. But once you understand it, you know what it means. Practice remembering it without looking at your notes. Check yourself to make sure you're not practicing the wrong thing and creating the wrong pattern in your brain. But you want to practice remembering. Lots of different ways to do this. You can use flashcards, cue cards. You can just study from your notes, cover them with your hand, and remember what's coming next. You can create a study guide for yourself. We'll talk about that more in the exam writing sessions. Practice tests, and AI can be really good for this too. You can get AI to quiz you on the information that you're trying to learn. So, just to recap, we've talked a little bit about how humans learn stuff, basically by getting our brains to light up in new patterns and then repeating those patterns until we can create them on our own. We talked about how you can make learning active by actively participating, by doing things that cause you to think rather than just absorb information. And we do this because learning is an activity. It's not an object or something like that. You need to actually do the process to be able to have it happen. And the way you make learning stick is repetition and practicing remembering. That's how things will stick. Um, we talked about how you create a good learning environment, an environment where you're, comfortable, but not too comfortable. You're not too distracted. You have all your materials, things like that. You're putting yourself in a situation that's the best. But we're remembering that uh, good studying in a bad environment is still effective, whereas bad studying in a good environment is not really effective. We talked about a few problems: perfectionism, unrealistic expectations, um, and so forth, that are some common problems when you try to learn new information. Um, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Shoot me an email here. Uh, if you have questions about how you can make an appointment one-on-one with a learning strategist, I can help you with that. If you have questions about where to access more resources and learning how to study, or registering for the next seminar, all of these things, you can reach out to me. My email's on the screen here, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But thanks so much, everyone, for watching, and best of luck in all your studies.